If you're a welder, this mess probably looks familiar to you. Previously on the channel, we unboxed this Multimatic 220 AC/DC machine, and now we've got to find a home for all this stuff. So all of this stuff needs to find a home. This is a multi-process machine, meaning we've got leads for MIG, TIG, and stick, as well as our ground, and we have a TIG foot pedal that we need to find a home for as well. We've got two individual tanks that we need to find a place for, not to mention all of our filler rod, our TIG consumables, and then just our normal hand tools and filler rods that we're going to have no matter what. So today on the channel, what we're going to do is make a custom budget cart to hold all of this stuff. Let's get to it. So if you're watching this video, it probably means you came to the same determination that I did. Going online and trying to find a cart that will get shipped to your house that's exactly what you want, that you don't have to spend an arm and a leg on, is a pretty tough thing to find. That being said, if you find a cart online that you like and you're willing to spend the money on it, have at it. For me, what I found is the Chicago Electric welding cabinet. It's got some pretty decent drawers. I went to my local Harbor Freight. They had one out for me to look at, so I went through it, and the rollers seem pretty decent. The cabinets are pretty nice. The drawers are well built. The only thing it didn't do is it doesn't accommodate for 2 bottles, and it doesn't have spots for my filler rod and my electrodes. So we're gonna put this one together, and then we're gonna see how we can manipulate it to make it fit what we want it to do. Okay, so we have got the cart put together, and I've got my welder sitting on the top of it. I've actually got all my leads and everything connected because I wanted to get a feel for how it was going to be laid out before I started making any big changes to the cart. Before I cut something apart that I didn't want to. I really just wanted to get everything on here and see what we're dealing with. The biggest thing is this handle has to come off because we can't actually plug anything into our ground port, so that's going to have to go. I'm not totally in love with these side hooks that hold all of our leads, but they do function for the time being, so we're going to leave those. The top of the cart is actually just too short to fit the welder, so we're going to have to do some manipulating here to make that happen. There's some little notches, some little tabs here. We're going to have to notch out and extend the front of this thing out. That's not totally necessary, but I want to just for my own peace of mind, especially since we're taking this handle off and I don't know what we're doing with that yet. I want to make sure that we've got that top fixed. And then probably the biggest project is going to be getting our bottles set up in the back. So we want 2 bottles in the back of this. It's currently only set up for 1. The last thing is I really want some storage for my electrodes. Or sorry, not my electrodes, but my filler rods. I really want some storage for that. I can live without my welding rods being on here. I really want my electrodes to be on here. Just because they do take up a lot of room in the garage, so I want to make a spot for it on the cart. I think I've got a pretty good idea on how everything is going to need to go on here and how we're going to make these changes. So what we're going to do next is I'm going to hop on the computer actually, go on to my Torchmate software. I'm going to draw up some solutions there. Then we're going to go to the shop. We're going to get those things cut out, get them bent the way they need to be, get everything ready. Then we'll come back here to the garage and we'll start putting this stuff together.
Okay, so here we have a screen grab of the Torchmate software. I didn't have enough time in this video to go through and really do this program justice, but you can see that we have our 2 saddle pieces on the left-hand side and then our new base plate on the right-hand side, making sure that we've got tabs that stick out so we can bend them down to add just a little bit of rigidity to these pieces. So we're going to go ahead and get these cut out, get them bent, and then get them back to the shop.
And just like that, we have all of our pieces cut. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to go use this old brake, and I'm going to bend these edges up. So if you noticed in our design, we've got these little edges marked out. So these pop out. What we're going to do with those is I'm actually going to bend those up. Whenever it comes to sheet metal gets its rigidity and its strength from its bends. So if you had like a car panel just laid out flat, it'd be really flimsy. You probably noticed this if you've ever washed a car on really flat panels. You can get some flex in them, but on those ridges, that's where they get their rigidity. So we're gonna go ahead, use this, and get these broken to 90 degrees. I don't have my tripod with me, so unfortunately I'm not gonna be able to record that. If you're interested in seeing some of that in the future, please let me know, and I'd be happy to bring that up here and show you how it's done. Back here at the home garage, the first thing I want to mess with is I want to get this back plate on. So this is kind of the foundation that our new bottles are that the two bottles are gonna sit on. Our measurements worked out really great. I'm happy with how we're fitting side to side. It did end up being exactly the same length, which I probably should have thought about beforehand, but it's gonna sit right on top of this ridge here. So the first thing we need to do is we're gonna need to zip that off, which isn't a big deal because we're gonna get that rigidity back because we've got that same bend in this plate here. So when we stack that on, we'll just need to weld this piece to the bottom piece. Okay, so I've got the machine temporarily hooked up, or hooked back up rather. We're grounded up top here, and I've got this set up for scratch start TIG, mainly because I feel like TIG welding. You could certainly go, do this with MIG. It would be no problem. And I might switch back to MIG if this frustrates me, because I have not done scratch start TIG, like I said, in a very long time. So, but what a wonderful opportunity to practice. So we should be ready to go. Just need to adjust my stick out here ever so slightly. So we're all set up on the machine. I've got some 16th inch filler. I'm gonna do this tack weld here in the middle first. When I say tack weld, I'm gonna weld about an inch here because that's all this needs. I'm gonna get 1 inch weld down here in the middle, and then we'll go to the outside and start stitching in that. Whenever you're welding something like this, a plate on a plate, not a very common practice that you'll do, but it is going to start to warp up the middle first. So what I want to do is I want to secure the middle of it and work out, just like I would do if, attaching a sticker or something like that. So, like I said, scratch start TIG, we're running about 55 amps. This is what the auto set says to do. So again, just kind of playing around with the machine. Let's see how it goes. All right, so not too bad. A little tricky here at the start, but overall I'm pretty happy with that. The machine's doing a really good job of keeping a solid, steady arc going. I do like this machine's auto set because off the top of my head I couldn't tell you most thicknesses for TIG welding, just because I don't do it very often. But this is really going to help me just develop that skill. Not the world's greatest weld, I'll admit. We'll get a picture of that here. But overall, I'm pretty happy with it. Little scrubby on the start, but not bad. So unfortunately, the camera died when we were doing our welding here, which isn't a big deal, I suppose, since we're not set up to do arc shots yet, which I am working on. But in the meantime, I got the rest of these welds finished out. And then while the camera was charging back up, I went ahead and cut our new axle, and then cut the old axle out. So that's gonna sit in here just like this, same way that the old one sat in here. We're gonna get that welded into place. Later on. The first thing I wanna do, if I can get this clamped down properly, I do wanna get this drilled and tapped before I get this welded on, just in case I break a tap or I run into problems and have to remake this. Before I weld it on here, I do want to get that accomplished first. I also don't like putting a bunch of heat into something before I go ahead and do any sort of drilling or manual cutting on it, because it hardens the steel. I don't want to mess with that. So I'm going to get these drilled and tapped first before I go ahead and weld it on here. The old axle had metric threads in it. I'm just gonna cut 1/4 by 20 in these. Whenever I build anything, I like to just keep it standard. So, that's that, and we'll catch back up here in a little bit. All right, so it's a brand new day here. I've got the axle drilled and tapped. I've also went through and I polished it up with some sandpaper, so we're ready to put it in. You can see I've got it clamped on both ends. I've got my ground here ready to go. Now I'm going from a 5/8 rod down to a 1/16 plate. So this is the area of my TIG welding where I need lots and lots of work on. So what a wonderful opportunity to work on it. I've got everything cleaned up. The machine is set up where I think it needs to be. I'm running about 65 amps. Hopefully that will be enough to just nip into this bottom, the bottom of this axle, but still have plenty of penetration for the top. Now, this can certainly be done with MIG, and the wonderful thing about this is because where it sits, it doesn't need to be a particularly strong weld. Really, it just needs to keep it from falling out when we stand it up. So, we're gonna go ahead and get that welded in now. All right, that's gonna do it for our axle welding. I'm happy with that. I don't think, we could sit here and we could weld the whole thing out, but I don't think that's necessary. I think that's everything that we're gonna need on that. So we are gonna go ahead and throw our axle on here. Or sorry, not our axle, but our wheels on here. Once these cool down, we'll throw those down, pop this thing up, and we'll test fit some tanks, make sure that's working good. All right, I'm very happy with how these tanks are sitting on here. First and foremost, I'm liking that we don't have a whole bunch of wasted space on either side. That's what I like to see. I've got our tank holders just in there temporarily, so I've just got the bottom one in there now. So the bottom one we're actually just gonna weld to the bottom, our new bottom plate that we've made. And then our top one is either going to mount here, or if we need to bring it down a little lower for our filler rod, we're gonna go ahead and mount that a little lower. If I can use these existing holes, I will, but if not, it's not the end of the world. But I'm liking that. That's looking really good. So we're gonna take these tanks off here now and keep going. Okay, so we have got our tank saddles ready to go. I went ahead and I welded this gusset in, just playing around with the pulse settings on the machine. In doing that, I did warp this piece quite a bit. I got it bent back mostly straight, and we've got it sitting down roughly flat. So that's where it needs to eventually sit, and you can see it just pops up like that, which isn't a big deal. What I'm gonna do is go ahead and tack this corner, which is set, go through, push it down and get it tacked in, and then we'll go through and weld it all out once I've got it all tacked. Okay, so we've got our bottom saddle welded in. That's ready to go. So I'm looking at the mounting for the top one. Now on this top one, there's a couple considerations. Number one, you can weld it in, or number two, we can bolt it in. So I've got it placed about where I would be able to utilize the existing holes. And I've got a tube of our filler rods in there just to kind of give me an idea of how it's gonna function. So I did go ahead and measure from the bottom plate up to the top of this saddle to make sure that my 80 size tank, so I've got two different tanks, one CO2 7525 and then one pure argon tank. My 7525 tank for the time being is a size 80 tank. It's really, really tough to get a hold of 125 tanks right now. So I'm waiting to get another 125 to make it a matching pair. But until that point, I've got the 80 to get me by, and the 80 is gonna fit in here no problem. So I'm happy with where this one's at. If I wanna change it in the future, I can just replace those screws, drop it down lower if this ends up being a problem, trying to get my rods out or anything else like that. But the holes are big enough, it shouldn't be a problem. So we're gonna go ahead and pop some holes, transfer some marks, and then get this mounted on. And with that, we are all done with the modifications to the back of the cart to accommodate for 2 bottles. The only other thing I need to do is I need to make one slight modification to make our chains fit. So I went down to my local Tractor Supply and picked up some chain. This is the only chain that they had in stock that was even close to what I needed, but obviously it doesn't get caught the way it should. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to take these notches out ever so slightly. So I'm using an angle grinder really carefully just to get that chewed out ever so slightly. Okay, so in the process of trying to find a grinder disc, I actually found one of my carbide bits for my Dremel tool. So I ended up just using the Dremel tool to get these opened up. So we are all set there. I went through and checked each connection to make sure that we had plenty of grab. And so now these don't come out. So that is a good thing. So the next thing that we need to do is I'm going to drag over my size 80 tank, the same diameter, the 80 and the 125. I'm going to drag that over and I am going to do some test fitting to see how long I want to make my chains. So we may or may not have discussed it when we're talking about drawing this stuff on Torchmate, but I didn't have enough room to make these chain grabs on both sides of each tank. Because I wanted to try and keep the width as small as possible, what I've decided to do instead is just weld these tabs right here, which is going to be more than stable enough to hold these bottles up. Really all you're trying to do is just keep them from tipping over. So that's going to be plenty strong. I'm not worried about that at all. So we're going to go ahead, drag that tank over, figure out how long we need to cut each of our chains, cut our chains, and get those welded on. And with that, we are all done with our back section of the cart. So now that we can comfortably accommodate 2 tanks in the back, we've got our chain receptacles in, and we've got spots for all of our filler rods. Now we're ready to move on to the top of the cart where we need to do some more work. All right, so we got that handle off. Now we're ready to start messing with the top of the cart. So these are those little tabs I was talking about. So this is what's the problem. We've got them on both sides. So we need to get those removed. So what I've got is basically just a new extension to go on top of this cart. So once we cut these tabs out, the idea is that we're just gonna extend the front of the cart out to make it fit the machine, and then we should be good to go. All right, so I've got our piece held down here by this cinder block. Cinder blocks are wonderful, in case you didn't know. They're nice and heavy, and it doesn't matter if you screw them up because they're super cheap. So I'm gonna go ahead and tack down this corner, and then we'll get this other side shimmied over where it needs to be, and we'll tack it down too. So I went ahead and I got a couple more tacks on this thing. Went through and measured these out since they're facing up. I'm gonna be able to see these at least when the machine's off of it. So I'm gonna go ahead and weld these out. Just measured out little 1-inch welds, tacked it on both ends, so that way it's not gonna lift on me anywhere. So let's get this welded up. All right, so with that, our machine is on top of the cart. We fixed 2 of our 3 major problems, Now we've just got one left, which is the handle. Now realistically on this cart with this machine, I probably don't need a handle. The handle on top of the machine is probably perfectly fine. However, for the purpose of this video, and if you're trying to follow along and get some ideas on how to do this, I'm gonna go ahead and make a handle. I've got some scrap metal to do it with. My goal is to leave this welder on top of the machine so that way I can plug in my ground over here, so we're making sure we've got our clearance. We also need to clear this bottom drawer. So really this is our room that we've got to work with. We just need to get the handle something like right that, and then we will be good to go. So we're gonna leave this up here. It is late in the evening, so we're gonna call it a day and get back at it tomorrow. Okay, now that our handle is completely cooled off, which is really no problem today, here in Oklahoma, it is 5 degrees outside and howling wind. So I held it outside for just a minute or so and it was cooled off pretty quickly. Now, what I have done is blocked this thing up using the drawer and some 2x4s and some shims, really anything I had around to get this blocked up. And I'm happy with where I've got it sat now. So I'm clear of my ground cable. I can still get that ground cable in and out. And I'm clear of my drawer. I can still open that drawer, no problem. And I've settled on 2.5 inches away from the edge here. 2.5 inches away from the edge. And with a 1-inch piece of flat strap, which is what I have, it's the same thickness the same width as this ruler off a combination square. I'm going to be running about dead flat to the top edge. So I've gone ahead and I've marked where 1 inch down is. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have to remove over here, it's out of the frame, but I'm going to have to remove this one handle or this one hook for the leads. I'm going to figure out what this angle is here, and ideally I'm going to have a piece come straight across. I'm going to cut it at an angle it down, weld those two pieces together. And if I've got my movie magic down, you'll see an example of what I'm looking for here on the screen. Ta-da! So that's what we're hoping to make. So we're going to take a couple more measurements, get our angle figured out. We're going to get that cut. Okay, so we've got this all mocked up. I went ahead and I checked to make sure I can install and uninstall my ground cable. I made sure that I can still open this drawer and get inside of it. Our brackets are mounted on each side and they are all the way bolted in. So now what we're gonna do is go ahead and weld on the handle where it sits. I've got a Carhartt jacket or a Carhartt vest rather, that I'm just gonna lay over the corner of the machine as I do the full weld. I'm just going to do fusion tacks on top to start with. It's kind of a mess right now, but once we get all this extra stuff out of the way, it should be nice and clean. All right, and with that last couple of welds done, we are complete. You can see that our handle turned out really nice. You don't need the Torchmate software, a big fancy thing. You know, cutting this angle bracket, that would have been easier to do on Torchmate, but just to show you that you can absolutely do kind of sort of the same thing with hand tools at home. Everything is possible, so long as you're willing to be patient and just work at it. The next thing we're gonna do is go through with a file and a flap disc on a grinder, go through and clean everything up. I'm a huge fan of files. A nice fine file, you can pick these up at pawn shops, pretty much anywhere you can find a file. Even cheap ones are perfectly fine, just to go through and get all the small stuff that your grinder can't get to and clean up those little bitty burrs that your grinder leaves behind. We're gonna get all of this stuff cleaned up, then we're gonna shoot a coat of paint on it and then load this cart up. And just like that, our giant mess that we started with at the beginning of the video, now here at the end is all contained in our nice, neat welding cart. First of all, if you have made it here to the end of the video, I want to thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate your view. If you're liking the stuff that you're seeing coming out of this channel, please like, comment, and subscribe. I would love to be able to make more videos. So long as I keep seeing support, I'm going to keep doing it. So let's talk about the cart overall. The cart overall, I'm really happy with. I think it's a nice, sleek design. I think we made some compromises here in the back section. I think 16 inches was pretty narrow to try and fit both tanks in, but I'm happy that I did it because I love the sleekness of the cart. We've only added about an inch to each side, which for me is perfect. The other thing I want to note about the cart itself, about the process of doing it, is I did everything in scratch start TIG. And I did that because scratch start TIG is a process of welding that I probably feel the least comfortable with, which is why I forced myself to do it. Important note, you will never ever get better at the things you never do. So if you have something that you struggle with, make sure that that's the thing that you're focusing on practicing. All in all, I'm very happy with the cart. I hope that you guys have enjoyed watching the video, and I hope you have a wonderful day.